G'day guys, this is Jay signing in for the first time with a 9.1.5 Arms Warrior PvP guide. I want to start by telling you a quick bit about myself. I'm an Aussie and I'm a Shadowlands multi-gladiator Arms Warrior who queues mostly WPS. I've been 2656 this season and I generally queue around 2600 to 2800 MMR. I decided to make this guide to help you better understand the warrior class and to help you increase your arena rating if you're playing warrior. I've decided to break the guide down into a series of smaller videos because I personally like smaller videos. I find that they're easier to digest. Today what we're going to do is start with the 9.1.5 changes that affect the Arms Warrior class and then focus on both spec and PvP talents. This is going to be a more comprehensive look at talent selection to help you understand the decision-making process instead of just spoon-feeding you the information. If you want the short version, I'll pop that up before we get started so that you don't need to watch the entire video. Alrighty guys, let's get stuck into this bad boy. They didn't hit us too hard with the big bat this time, and Warrior fortunately remains largely unchanged in patch 9.1.5. That's much to the dissatisfaction of the entire PvP community, but I don't care, I'm pretty happy, and if you're watching this video, you're probably pretty happy too. There are some relevant changes to the class, and these surround the two Covenant choices for Warrior. These include Necrolord and Kyrian, obviously. Necrolord obviously gets the ability Fleshcraft. It formerly absorbed 40% of max HP, and it's been decreased down to 30%. Any shield over that when the arena gates open is going to be reduced to 30% of the player's max HP, so that's okay. Kyrian's seen a little bit of a nerf too, and that's to the Elysium Might Legendary here. So you're still going to get that full duration of spear. You'll still get the 8-second spear, which is still fantastic, but the increased bonus critical strike damage was 25%. It is now 15%, so that's a change of 10%. I'm still pretty happy with that. I've queued a lot since then. My rating's still going up, and it still feels really, really nice. Other relevant change too is a bit of a different one, and they've actually added in a crit versus two-handed weapon. So I'm pretty stoked with this. You can see that bad boy there. We're going to sub out crit for mastery now, and you'll get 15 crit on top of the amount of mastery you had, though you're going to lose 16 versatility. So we've got a lot of verse at this point in the expansion. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm stoked the weapon's in. Good addition. I did wish they were a little bit more clear about it because I spent all my honor upgrading my pieces to elite just because I thought the honor had no purpose. Alrighty, for those who want the short version, here it is. Open the mouth, here comes the spoon. Woo! You're going to pick up Sudden Death, Stormbolt, Massacre, Defensive Stance, Warbreaker, Avatar, and Dreadnought. PvP talents, you'll get away with these three: Sharpened Blade, Disarm, and Warbanner. All really multi-purpose choices. For those that are going to stick around, let's get into it. Alrighty guys, so on your first tier of talent choices, you've got War Machine, Sudden Death, and Skull Splitter. War Machine and Skull Splitter are PvE rage generation talents, which isn't an area we're going to suffer in too much in PvP, so forget about them. We want Sudden Death. Now, that's going to give you a chance to proc a free execute costing 0 rage, which can be used regardless of the target's HP. The benefit of Sudden Death is that it increases the burst capability of the class, alright? So it adds a sudden and large injection of damage, which is quite jarring for a healer to be healing into. It procs approximately 1.7 times per minute, and this is not including haste modifiers. So if you've got a haste build as opposed to crit, you might see a few extra procs. I recommend that you pick up a weak aura for this ability. I'll show you an example of that. And the reason that I recommend this is you want to use it as soon as it procs. You want to get the most out of your damage, okay? Alrighty, on the next tier here, we've got Double Time, Impending Victory, and Stormbolt. Double Time, Impending Victory, poo-poo. You need to pick up Stormbolt. It is a ranged, non-dispellable stun on a 30-second cooldown, and it's a 4-second stun. This is really good. It's going to be your contribution to most kill setups. It's also a very versatile ability. And what I mean by that is it can be used offensively or defensively. It can be used during a go to lock down and burst down a target or connect to them, and it can be used against enemies to interrupt and disrupt their go. Also be used to interrupt CC, for example. Mages casting poly on the healer. Throw that Stormbolt at that sucker and stop that poly. I can see Double Time having its place, but I think that's only going to be against certain classes in 2v2. In 3v3, you've got teammates. They offer supplementary tools to counter and match enemy mobility. So definitely want to pick up Stormbolt here. On our level 30 row, we've got Massacre, Fervor of Battle, and Rend. On this tier, you're going to pick up Massacre. It allows you to execute targets below 35% instead of 25%. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but let me tell you, this 10% is of high value to you. In the current meta, damage is very high and the game is fast-paced. So being able to execute people at 35% forces the enemy team to be very cautious about their health. You can put immense pressure on the enemy team with the Massacre talent, especially when using sweeping strikes when one target's low to hit a second target that isn't even in execute range. Massacre essentially provides you with amazing finishing power, so it allows you to end that game out when you've got somebody low, and you can close that game sooner than you otherwise may have been able to if you weren't running this talent. Another thing worth mentioning is the synergy between Sudden Death and Massacre. You've more than likely experienced being crit above 35%, which then puts you into execute range, and the warrior still has sufficient rage to murder you with another 3 executes. With this tier as well, though, I think Rend is somewhat viable. I like Rend a lot because I like the playstyle. I like a lot of WLS, WPS. I'd probably only consider it, though, into plate-heavy classes or plate-heavy comps like TSG, as Rend's damage actually ignores armor. And with high uptime, Rend would offer more damage overall, though it isn't as rage effective to spread it outside of sweeping strikes, and the damage is far less impactful than the pressure you'll put on someone with a semi-low health target with Massacre. Rend has great synergy with the Battlelord Legendary though, and as it costs 40 rage, it actually gives you a 56% chance to proc the reset of a cooldown of Overpower, and then Overpower has a chance to reset the cooldown of Mortal Strike. I'd still say that you'd pick up Enduring Blow over this, but something to consider. If you're trying to choose between Massacre and Rend, consider Rend being like flicked with a rubber band repeatedly, whereas picking up Massacre is more like being beat over the head with a big fucking stick over and over. So pick which one you like better, but I strongly suggest you pick Massacre. You're going to make a lot more people sad with Massacre. Alrighty, on our 4th row, we've got Second Wind, Bounding Strike, and Defensive Stance. Defensive stance, if I could pick any talent on this this tree here and say it's mandatory, it's Defensive Stance. It's a must. You've got to pick up Defensive Stance. Gives you access to Defensive Stance, which reduces the damage you deal and take by 20%. This is the talent that gives the warrior class its inherent tankiness. Makes us really hard to kill and really durable, and it really pisses people off. So you've got to pick this one up. I would say that it's a really good idea to put your Defensive Stance icon in a viewable position on your UI so that you can manage your stance dancing. I'll go over that in another video, but really important to have it in a viewable spot, okay? Alright, on our 5th tier, we're looking at Collateral Damage, Warbreaker, and Cleave. Now, Collateral Damage and Cleave really don't offer enough damage to keep up with Warbreaker. Warbreaker essentially gives you a 30% damage increase for 10 seconds to all targets that your ability hits. This replaces Colossus Smash, which is on a 1.5 minute cooldown, and is single target, offers the same effect, 30% increased damage for 10 seconds. This meta is all about high damage, and Warbreaker lets you do more of it to more people. So it's a bit of a no-brainer here. Provides high AoE burst, and when paired with something like Sweeping Strike, Spear of Bastion, or Bladestorm, you can really fucking kick some dicks. The only downside of Warbreaker is the word that's opposite Warbreaker is Disarm. As soon as you use Warbreaker, alarm bells are going to go off and everyone's just going to disarm it. And that can be super annoying, but it's still the best ability to pick between those 3 choices by far. Alright, so moving on from that tier, we're going to go down here. We're looking at In for the Kill, Avatar, and Deadly Calm. You're going to pick up Avatar. It's going to give you a 20% damage increase for 20 seconds on a 1.5 minute cooldown. Avatar contributes to your burst and can be paired with Warbreaker to absolutely fucking whack people. So hard they end up on the forums complaining. I keep carrying on about burst because the less time people have to actually react to your damage, the more impactful it's going to be. So pairing cooldowns like this, stacking damage modifiers, really kicks people square in the dick. this isn't the only reason you want to pick up Avatar. The reason that Avatar has an edge over In for the Kill and Deadly Calm is the root break effect that accompanies the damage effect. Another point to consider with Avatar is it's off the GCD, and that's the reason it can be paired with those other abilities to make a cocktail that you can throw at someone's fucking head. The cooldown of Deadly Calm is the same as Spear, so I mucked around with that a little bit to test for this video, but when I compared it to Avatar's damage, I found it was pretty shit, to be honest. Yeah, Avatar's the choice on this tier. Moving down, last tier, Anger Management, Dreadnought, and Ravager. You're going to pick up Dreadnought. It gives you 2 charges of Overpower and causes it to throw out a wave that deals damage to enemies in a 10-yard line. Dreadnought is one of the abilities that contributes to the consistent damage output of the warrior class, and it makes your rotation just feel better. That could be psychological. I don't know. We're warriors. I just like to hit things, and I can hit more things when I've got more buttons. Dreadnought has great synergy with the Conduit Crash the Ramparts, which also has synergy with the Tactician passive, which we'll go over in another video. It's also useful as Overpower can't be blocked, dodged, or parried. So it's really good into classes like Monk, go straight through Fists of Fury, DHs through their Blur, and even Rogues through their Evasion. Feels good. So we've got 2 charges. You can still do something when they're using these abilities. A drawback, though, is the Seismic Wave that it's talking about there on the tooltip can actually break CC. So if you're a warrior that likes to play with mages, you do need to be mindful of this. Anger Management is something that can be considered. And the reason that I say this is it de-aligns the cooldown of Disarm with Warbreaker. So when you're versing enemies, if you're playing Anger Management, you'll actually be able to Warbreaker outside their Disarm cooldown. So that's a niche pick that you could pick up. You're generally going to want to do this in 2s versus certain classes like Enemy Warriors and Rogues. That marks the end of the class talent selection. We're going to move on to PvP talents. You might notice I've got a drink. Have a look at that cute little fucker there. Alrighty guys, let's rip into these PvP talents, hey? The way that I like to think about PvP talents when it comes to the warrior class is you can break them down into offensive and defensive options. Alright, let's start with Sharpened Blade. So Sharpened Blade is a 50% healing reduction for 6 seconds on a 25-second cooldown. It's also going to increase the damage of your next mortal strike by 15%. You're going to pick this up pretty much every game as it contributes heavily to offensive pressure and increases the finishing power of the class, right? So you'll get maximum benefit when using Sharpened Blade during a go. You want to aim to use it as an extension of your CC chain, right? On the kill target, and you're going to look to do it preferably when the enemy healer is leaving CC and the kill target's HP is a little on the lower side, as the healer is going to come out of that CC and be forced to try and heal and top that person with that Sharpened Blade active. It can also be used to deny any healing when a person pops a defensive cooldown, such as when a druid pops Frenzied Regeneration. If you're able to get an enemy low, it can also increase the momentum you've got against that target and put the enemy healer even further behind. Something to think about is I'd be very cautious using this to increase damage. 15% is a little bit, though using this when somebody is low is really the appropriate time to use the ability. Some other little tips for Sharpened Blade. It can be used alongside sweeping strikes to affect a second target. So if you're versing a melee cleave, it's really helpful, for example, to sweeping strikes, hamstring both, and then spread Sharpened Blade. Look at the HP and make a determination, though. It doesn't stack with a Mortal Wounds debuff, though. So when you apply Mortal Strike, you apply what's called Mortal Wounds. Sharpened Blade, if applied over the top, actually replaces it. So you need to keep this in mind, and the reason that you really need to think about this is if you use Mortal Strike during that 6-second duration of Sharpened Blade, you won't have it for when the Sharpened Blade ends, and you'll leave a gap in time where there is no healing debuff on the enemy target, right? So it's really important to think about that period. The only times when you won't take Sharpened Blade is into certain comps where there is no healing on the enemy team in 2v2, for example, Rogue Mage. Alternatively, you might want to drop this offensive option. Again, we break them down, offensive, defensive. This offensive option for one of your defensive options, it's generally going to be Master and Commander, but you do something like that maybe into RMP, where your offensive pressure is a little bit less important, and surviving is a little bit more important. All right, moving on to the next offensive option, Storm of Destruction. Now, this is an option that I'll rarely pick up. Does offer the benefit of decreasing the cooldown of Bladestorm to 1 minute, which will align it with the cooldown of Spear of Bastion if you're Kyrian. It also gives you a way to get out of roots a little sooner and immune yourself to CC. And it does synergize quite nicely with the Unhinged Legendary, which casts 2 Mortal Strikes during Bladestorm at a random enemy. It's a great choice if you're doing things like Battlegrounds, for example, though in Arena, Sharpened Blade is always going to have more value than what this ability will. And you've got a lot of defensive options as a warrior. It's probably going to be more advantageous to pick up one of the defensive options or 2 of the defensive options alongside Sharpened Blade. Alrighty, the next defensive option we're going to look at is the Warbringer talent. Now, this causes charge to deal damage and root the target in place for 2 seconds. It's also going to shoot a cone past that target, rooting anybody within 15 yards of them. This is an offensive option that can be used to increase single target damage or stick to a particularly slippery target. And for players like myself, with a little bit higher ping, it's a great tool to use to actually land your Spear of Bastion. You can charge, and as you're doing it, throw the spear at the landing point. Overall, though, much like Storm of Destruction, there are better options than Warbringer. I'd say it has a high value in maybe 2s, for example. More often than not, if I'm versing a Hunter in 2s, I'm going to pick up Warbringer and Death Sentence. So it does have its place for sure. All right, moving on to your 4th and final offensive option. That's going to be Death Sentence. Now, this is a must for Venthyr warriors, though Venthyr isn't a current meta pick, nor do I anticipate that it will be throughout 9.1.5. So we spoke earlier about the pressure Massacre can put on the enemy team by allowing you to execute targets sooner. Death Sentence increases this finishing power even further by preventing the target from kiting you. It can be a good choice into comps where you're likely to be kited and allow you to land the kill where you otherwise wouldn't. I recommend playing Death Sentence into Jungle Cleave, for example, and some Wizards. You'll find into Jungle, both the Hunter and Feral can be really hard to finish and can kite exceptionally well, and Death Sentence can be a great choice to mitigate this issue. I find that another class that it can help to finish is Demon Hunters. You'll find that as these classes are getting away from you, you'll be able to press that button and you'll end the game out earlier than you otherwise would have been able to. Alright guys, moving on from our offensive to our defensive options, and we'll kick this discussion off here with Disarm. So Disarm removes the enemy target's weapon for 6 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. This is going to be a must against any melee or non-BM hunter using a weapon to deal physical damage directly. Disarm can quite easily shut down an enemy kill attempt itself, and it's particularly good against classes that have a tendency to stack up multiple damage modifiers and then kick you square in the nuts. Like a Ret. Hot tip, if they use Seraphim, they're trying to swing a leg at your dick. It's also worth noting too that you should use Disarm with purpose. So if an enemy commits an offensive cooldown, it's okay to use Disarm. Never just use Disarm outside of these windows because you'll be punished for it later on. An example of when to use that would be when a warrior uses Warbreaker, when a rogue commits Vendetta, Shadow Dance, Shadow Blades, or even when a DK, for example, commits Pillar of Frost. I'll give you a practical example of that one. You're a sweaty Death Knight. I've just disarmed you on Pillar of Frost. You're not very fucking happy, are you? Right. It's also worth noting, specifically against enemy warriors, like I said, pair Warbreaker and Disarm. They share the same cooldown. You'll make the warrior as angry as a kick in the nuts. So consider that. Don't use it outside of those windows. Another good way to use Disarm against a warrior specifically is if you get them to around 40%, Disarm, because they can't use the Die by the Sword cooldown. And what that means is they won't have access to the biggest defensive cooldown, and it's very likely you'll actually be able to land the kill right then and there. Similar use against rogues, for example. Rogues require a weapon to use their abilities like Cheap Shot and Kidney Shot. So if you anticipate that a go is just about to occur and you're quick enough, you can actually disarm them to end the go right then and there. Again, I just want to reiterate, big point, don't use Disarm randomly or you will be punished for it, okay? To get the maximum ability out of it, pair it with the enemy team's offensive cooldowns. Alrighty, on to our next defensive option. We're going to be looking at Warbanner. Warbanner might be my favourite PvP talent, I think. It decreases the duration of incoming CC by 50%. It's a great choice, especially into setup-based comps like RMP, RPS, and Jungle Cleave. Any comp really that relies upon the win condition of a long CC chain to end the game. Warbanner can be very rewarding to use, but it takes practice to use well and with consistency. An easy and effective use of Warbanner would be used to interrupt the current CC chain occurring on your healer. To give you a bit of an example of that, if a hunter uses Intimidation Stun on your healer, you can use Warbanner to decrease the duration of the incoming trap. Essentially, what you'd want to do, around 2.5 seconds into the Intimidation Stun, which is a 4-second stun, the hunter's going to aim to maximize duration by trapping. Use it then. More advanced way to use Warbanner would be used in anticipation of incoming CC. As an example, when a rogue's kidney shot's off cooldown and their player movement suggests they're intending to do a go. Some of those ways that I've recommended might seem a little bit overwhelming to begin with. So a great way to get used to it is if you're quite new to Warrior, is to use it to increase the duration of incoming spells on yourself. Like, let's say, for example, you lack the awareness, but you see that the mage is casting a polymorph on you. Pretty easy. Chuck down the Warbanner. It's going to decrease that poly by half. Aim to use it, though, when you are not currently on DR, so you get maximum benefit out of the ability. I think it's wise to use a weak aura to track when the banner is active. And the add-on like Omni CC, for example, to track the duration of CC affecting your healer. The benefit of this is you can use it to time the banner more efficiently, so the enemy team doesn't just kill it and you get no benefit for a 1.5 minute talent choice. So you've got to be really wise with this one. It takes a bit of practice, but give it a go and get used to it. Alrighty, the next defensive option is Master and Commander, which decreases the cooldown of Rallying Cry by 1 minute and increases the health granted by 15%. It's a pretty well-rounded talent choice, and you can pick it up if the other choices aren't mandatory. It could be subbed in against RMP, for example, at the expense of an offensive option like we discussed earlier, like Sharpened Blade. It's also a good defensive option for yourself when you're playing against a comp you know is going to target you. Also shares a bit of synergy with the conduit choice. Let's have a look here. Inspiring Presence. So essentially that's then going to add more duration and more health granted by Rallying Cry. So really good pickup there. Okay, now your final defensive option is going to be Duel. I find that the vast majority of the Warrior community incorrectly overlooks Duel. I really like this ability. It's going to reduce the damage the target deals by 50% for 8 seconds if they deal damage to any target other than you, though you'll see it's going to have the same effect on you. So if you use it on somebody and then you attack somebody else, your damage will be cut in half as well. Because it's an uncommon pick, it isn't tracked by a lot of players on their Omnibar, for example. And you'll notice that when it's used, a lot of people don't even swap. I play around 2700 MMR, and when I use this ability on, let's say, enemy rep warrior teams, they don't even swap off my Shadow Priest. The one drawback is, as you've probably guessed from what we're talking about, that if they do actually pick up on this or they do decide to go you, the ability becomes essentially useless. But Duel can become a good alternative for Disarm against teams where Disarm has no value. And we're looking at teams that have like a Feral, for example, or maybe a Windwalker. Duel can be used particularly well when rotated with Intervene and Disarm, for example, which can really increase the durability of your team. I play WPS, to give you a bit of an example, and I play this into teams like Ret, Warrior, TSG, Turbo, and I find that rotating through these abilities with my Shadow Priest's defensive cooldowns makes him pretty much unkillable. You'll here and there you'll get them swapping out of frustration, but if those teams get off your Shadow Priest and they start hitting you, he's going to do mountains of damage to those fuckers. Really, a lot of damage, so that's advantageous too. Okay, now there is one final talent choice option that falls outside the offensive and defensive categories, and that's going to be Demolition. Demolition reduces the cooldown of Shattering Throw to 1 minute and increases the damage it deals against shields by 500%. This talent was buffed in 9.1 and is now a very efficient means of completely removing enemy defensive cooldowns, like for example a Warlock's Dark Pact, which is also on a 1 minute cooldown. Can be paired with offensive cooldowns to really kick dick. So if you use Shattering Throw, you've got Demolition, you want to pair it with maybe Warbreak and it'll rip a shield straight off. It is niche, though it works against things like Fleshcraft, which is fun due to the prevalence of Fleshcraft and Necrolord in the meta in general. I'd say that where this talent really shines would be against Warlocks. There's a lot of Demo Locks popping up, and Mistweaver monks perhaps too. Okay, so I've taught you a little bit about each PvP talent individually. What I want to do now is take that a step further and teach you how to actually choose PvP talents when you're faced with certain compositions, for example. The process isn't nearly as complicated as it might seem to newer players. So what you need to do is start with a template. So my template is going to be Sharpened Blade, Disarm, and Warbanner. As Sharpened Blade's pretty much an auto lock outside RMP and double DPS 2s, that only leaves you to consider Disarm and Warbanner. So what you need to do is consider the relevance of Disarm and Warbanner to the matchup, and also consider to your individual playstyle, because that can be a factor. And taking that a step further, consider if there are any talents discussed in the video that supplement a disadvantage that you may have against an enemy composition, or consider how the talent may disrupt the enemy team's win condition. For example, with a warrior, we're easily kited by hunters, and therefore that death sentence choice can be a supplement to the issue. And yeah, another example too would be Ret and Warrior. They win simply off just dumb fucking idiot damage on a very short setup, which just includes Stormbolt and Hodge really. So I like to run Duel and Disarm to give me a reliable answer to their win conditions. I'll give you a look now at my talent choices against some of the more meta compositions. Let's say Jungle, RMP, and Ret Warrior. And hopefully that gives you some insight into talent choices and is helpful to some extent. Okay guys, that is it for the first installment. I hope you liked the video. I hope it gives you a bit of insight into the warrior class that you didn't have before you watched it. And if you did like the video, please give it a crisp thumbs up for us and chuck any comments below with any questions or suggestions you might have. Obviously, this is my first video. Any feedback you've got for us, chuck that down below as well. And hopefully I'll see you next time for Covenants, Soulbinds, and Conduits. Thanks guys. See ya.